Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our new edition on Signals Understanding the Coronavirus Crisis. As a quick reminder, your microphones have been muted by default, so please, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the question dialog box for that purpose. Jennifer, it's yours.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you everyone for being with us today. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. So things have changed quite a lot since we last spoke. Many of us in many countries around the world are slowly coming out of lockdown, and we are starting to go back to shops, to the offices, to restaurants, of course, with a very different situation than a few months ago, but things are going back to seeing the economy restart. And as that happens, we're here with you, share our fresh, updated perspectives, local points of view, insights grounded in research to understand people and to plan for the future. So today we will have Simon update us as usual on the story so far. And we are delighted to then have Sedar tell us about his experience in Turkey, where he lives. Then Lendert will tell us about COVID conversations and how social media has taught us things and can help us understand the future as well. And finally, Jan will share an updated perspective from China with the latest findings of our Optimism and Anxieties report. And with this, I will pass over to Simon.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you today. What I wanted to do, just to kick things off, is to take a look at the current mood in terms of public opinion around the world. And then, as Jennifer says, things are moving fast now, and to start to look ahead to this next phase, to think a little bit about what the attitudes we're finding now might mean for behaviours tomorrow. And Sedar will help us take that forward and build a picture with his experience from Turkey. So in terms of where we are in public opinion around the world, I think the first point to say is it is rather a depressing picture. When we look at what worries the world, our monthly tracker here, we find that coronavirus remains still the absolute big worry, but perhaps not the worry it was a month ago. However, what has replaced it? Well, in 6 countries, it's unemployment that has replaced coronavirus as the big concern of people in their country. And we see this in the consumer confidence index as well, results going down. The results have gone down everywhere since January. They are the worst set of results we've seen since we started recording this type of information 10 years ago. There is one, if you like, area of optimism on the horizon, in the sense that 2 countries are showing some improvement month on month, South Korea and China. And so it's great to have Jan with us this afternoon or this morning to share that perspective with us. But basically the picture is depressed in terms of where people's heads are. And we wanted to move forward, as I mentioned, to think about this next phase. And to start that, we're going back to Spain, where we have been tracking people's emotions week by week. And we've been asking them to assess where they feel they are on a scale as they go through the journey. And where people in Spain are now is, if you like, at the bottom right-hand side of our chart. They're starting to come out, perhaps physically and emotionally, of at least this stage of the journey, but it's a mixture of relief and fear. And the fear is encapsulated perhaps here, fear of new confinement, if you like, triggered by a second spike. And I think it's something for all of us to watch. If we think it's going to be very rational, linear process in the coming period of time, that may not be the case, and that's a concern in many countries, but also fear about going deeper into economic crisis. So that's very much a marker really in terms of where people's mood is. And to help us move things forward and start to think about what this might mean for behaviours, I wanted to draw on some data from the United States, looking at the auto sector in particular, which is quite a good barometer both on a macro and a micro level for a whole number of perhaps factors if we're trying to understand where people are. we've been asking people to think about when the COVID-related closures and restrictions are eased, what will they do? Well, people who've been driving their own cars certainly prior to lockdown, are expecting to be using them at least as much, if not more. People who use ride sharing or public transport, much more cautious at this stage, at least, about what they think they may or may not do. So this kind of data is perhaps a useful contextual piece for us to keep our eye on as we go through the coming weeks in terms of where people's heads are. And I mentioned the coming weeks deliberately because this week by week picture, I think, is very important as we all perhaps try to look a little bit further ahead into, let's say, the next quarter. This is what we were looking at a couple of weeks ago in the US. Even then, at that time, the proportion self-quarantining in a very strict way was down on where it had been in the middle of April. But we had 90% of people said they'd been social distancing. Where are we now? Well, the self-quarantining is down still further, but still we've got that very, very high proportion avoiding contact with others as much as possible. So at least for now, it's the new normal. And we see this here in the sense that perhaps even if the places were open, they may not be going out to eat, but still the takeout meal, the leisure time, the time out, important. Where are we today? Well, with this data that we received just last night, we're finding inching upwards in terms of going out to eat. It's now 12. It was 9 2 weeks ago. It was 7 2 weeks before that. And so that's, again, an example of week by week, we're starting to see some change. Risky to meet friends or family. 69% was the 1st to the 4th of May figure. Now 64%. So if you like, taking my ruler and drawing a very amateur straight line projection, I might be able to say that, well, by the beginning of September, nobody will be saying it's risky to go out to meet friends and family. Well, it may not be quite as simple as that, but this is a reminder that even within a relatively short period of time, things remain fluid, things remain moving quite fast, and we need to be sensitive to those nuances and be sensitive to perhaps being careful about generalizing too much when things remain dynamic. And with that in mind, we hope that the resources available on our COVID homepage can help you. Every week we put the latest expert analysis. Pertinent to this week is the piece in particular on forecasting in challenging times, which helps us just think through what we might need to adapt, at least in the way we approach the task of projecting things into the future. We're putting all the latest opinion polling there, of course, and I've also put in the deck some first-hand accounts through digital ethnography where consumers around the world have, if you like, expressed their own perspectives, and that could be helpful to you if you're looking to bring some of this to life, perhaps in your own organization. And then bringing things together, every couple of weeks we organize a digest of all the recent research on coronavirus. We also call that Signals, and that digest is available now. It's been released within the last hour. But I wanted just to draw very quickly on the latest opinion poll finding, released this week, because it encapsulates perhaps how attitudes today may impact on those behaviours tomorrow. This is the data on how comfortable people feel about going back into the workplace. And Jan's going to pick up on this actually a little bit later on with the China experience. Where we are today is 9 out of 16 countries. There's a majority of people feeling comfortable going back to work. But in only 2 of those 16 countries are people comfortable about allowing children go back to school. So it feels like an important reminder of how this interplay perhaps between the mood, today's attitudes may impact on tomorrow. And thinking about tomorrow, one of the things that we've always been finding, I think, as we've gone through this crisis, is the importance of looking at individual markets and the individual context. Turkey, for example, a country which has been hard hit by the crisis like many others. The public, very clear that that's the key issue facing the country. CEDAR and colleagues have prepared a report which gives us a guided tour of the latest findings in terms of how people feel and in terms of what they're doing. And we're delighted to have CEDAR with us today from the office, I may say, in Istanbul. Cedar, it's great to see you. How are you today?
I'm very well, Simon. Thank you. How about you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm good, thank you. I'm conscious it's been, I think, quite an important week in Turkey, not just because you're in the office, but more because people have been allowed out for the first time. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about just the current or the last week in Turkey.
Okay. The first coronavirus case was announced at the middle of March. So it has been around 9 weeks now since the first case in Turkey. After that, government took some immediate actions. All the schools are closed. Including primary, elementary, high school students, all of them have been homeschooling since then. And flights to more than 60 countries were banned, and large public gatherings like prayers, weddings, conferences are forbidden. And after 2 weeks from the beginning of April, it has been also forbidden to travel in between major cities in Turkey. And maybe the most important action that has been taken by the government was imposing a curfew for the people who are older than 65 and younger than 20 years of age. So that means 40% of the nation, which is a very strong action, actually. And as a result of all of these actions, I think that compared to many other countries, we can say that the strategy implemented in Turkey in terms of saving more lives was successful. There are more than 150,000 cases in Turkey, but the number of deaths is around 4,000 at the moment. Yeah, it's a good figure actually, and also on the other hand, in terms of saving lives, that was really successful story. But Turkey's problem will be a deep financial crisis because the country had been already facing a major financial crisis even before the pandemic. Now the picture is even worse. Especially there are two important industries, retail and tourism, are very important industries in terms of their contribution to the country's total GDP. And these are the top industries that will be very much negatively affected by the restrictions. And at the moment, employee contract termination is forbidden in Turkey.
Right.
It will be staying as it is until the end of June. But many companies are suffering because of the financial slowdown. So therefore, it is very likely that we are going to face a significant jump in unemployment starting from July on.
So big disruption, big rupture. What about you as a Turkish citizen, Turkish researcher, Turkish CEO? What's the experience been like for you? We can see you're in the office now, but it seems like quite an experience.
Yeah, personally, this will be one of the times that I will never forget for the rest of my life, of course. Except the first week, I've been continuously coming to the office with my previous routine. Although all of our employees have been working from homes. But our office area is almost 3,000 square meter space. And during the last 8 to 9 weeks, most of the time, I've been alone or just with people with me in this giant space. This is really strange.
Yeah.
But I think that's a battle. That's a war in between us and pandemic conditions. And here, I'm trying to defend our castle. And I believe that it gives a big strength to my colleagues who know that I'm always here and I'm always on action. in order to protect our business. Other than coming to the office, really, I don't do anything personally because my only hobby is sailing, and unfortunately, it is also forbidden in Turkey.
Yes, I knew how important that was to you. So yeah, that's certainly a reminder, really, of just the individual behaviours and the things we like to do have changed. Now, you talked about the financial uncertainty already being there, and that perhaps being even more accentuated as we look forward. How is consumer behaviour changing in Turkey at the moment? What are you seeing on the ground that we should look out for during the coming period?
Actually, it is continuously changing from one week to another. I mean, during the last 8 to 9 weeks, we have been observing instant reactions related to different stages of the period, COVID-19 period, lockdown actually. The first week we measured some extra purchases, especially in some basic goods, basic needs such as pasta, oil, yeast, flour, and some other categories like house cleaning products and detergents and of course toilet paper, famous toilet paper. But the top 2 performer products in Turkey were eau de cologne for sanitization, hand sanitization, and vinegar for food sanitization.
Mm-hmm.
In the following weeks, we did not observe stockpiling. Instead of that, while staying at homes, people tend to buy snacks, desserts, and soft drinks in order to reach the pleasure. We are the cheapest route actually, since they were cooking at home, and the bread and pastry are the most common homemade foods in Turkey. Yeast have been always the top performer product throughout all this 9 weeks period. Other than that, 2/3 of the nation take this issue very seriously. This group of people think that it's not an exaggerated thing, it's critical, and there will be new waves as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the first, I mean, this is not the one and only way that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that the pandemic has already changed their perspective on life radically, significantly.
Yeah. And those are features of the report that the team has done. So with this webinar comes the report that your team has prepared. It does include, as you mentioned, food, and we're going to come back to that in a moment in the later presentations. But thank you, Cedar, for joining us. I'm going to hand back now to Jennifer in Milan and to take us back from Italy.
Yes, thank you so much, Sidar. So from Milan to Istanbul, I have a question for you. And it's as you were telling us of all this and how this period will impact you forever, and you will always remember what you've gone through. By the way, I love the image of you sitting alone in the castle, holding on to everything for your team. I'm sure it's had a very impact on them. I was wondering, what was the sort of the biggest surprise as you went through these weeks there in Turkey?
Actually, I'm surprised to see how quickly we have transformed the way of doing business in our company here, because we reacted very, very fast. Our online survey volume has been almost doubled in the past 2 months. So not only regarding our survey methodologies and data collection methodologies, but also some other things as well. For example, we have been organizing a huge research industry conference for more than 10 years with participation of hundreds of clients in Turkey. This year, that conference will be transformed into online as well. We are going to organize it purely on an online platform. So, and also we have realized that, this is another surprising thing for me, we have realized that some important issues, I mean, so-called important issues, are not that important in fact. For example, the city we are living, the neighborhood we are living in that city is not that important as we thought, because we can work remotely from anywhere. dress code, business trips. Seems like these are all from the past century, actually.
Great. So the speed of change has been surprising, and indeed lots of things have changed very, very fast for lots of us. Great. Thank you so much, Sidar. I will now hand over to Lendert, who is going to touch on some of the topics that you mentioned. It's interesting how we find them in different areas, and telling us how social media can teach us things and can also help us understand what we can expect in the future. Lendert?
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone, and very happy to be here and to see such a great audience. Indeed, we've been keeping a very close eye on social media conversations dealing with COVID crisis. And as you can tell, this is not trivial. We have to face a sheer volume of data that is just incredible. You'll see this in a minute. We have to deal with an amazing speed at which topics and themes and conversations are changing. And we also have to deal with a multi-language environment, which is not easy, as you can imagine. And I guess the very first lesson from this crisis so far has been the fact that consumers and citizens have considered social media probably not as the cure to the virus, but probably the cure to the lockdown. Just a few figures to share with you here, which I found very, very impressive. The main social media platforms have seen an amazing growth in their user base. If I'm just taking Twitter as an example, they grew 14% in the last 3 months. Facebook gained 100 million new users. So this is a massive phenomenon, and it doesn't stop, actually. And when you have more users, you can expect more data to analyze. Since the crisis began, we collected and processed, thanks to Synthesio, our social media platform, more than 1 billion social media posts on various platforms, the main ones obviously, but also on blogs, on forums, on news. People are really willing to share things and get more information, but also get connected with their fellow citizens. What we see here on this chart is a very sudden increase in the volume of data that we had to collect and process right at the moment when people actually, when lockdown measures were taken in a lot of different countries. And you see that immediately the change in the volume of data. But sharing with you metrics like these and volume is one thing, but it's certainly not enough. And what for me is striking in this crisis, and this was also said in previous presentation, as you noticed in our survey research in our trackers, we see that conversations are changing very, very rapidly. Just one example, French conversations. We made a first measurement and analysis on a topic modeling analysis just 3 days after the lockdown period happened in France. And what you saw at the time, and this is the blue bar here, is that international issues were things that people mostly commented on. Basically, what was happening in other countries, in Italy, in neighboring countries. Also, a lot of comments about sanitary measures and the epidemic per se. But just 7 days after this first analysis, we noticed a dramatic change in the content of conversations, where people actually starting to criticize very, very actively how the way the government was handling the crisis, and also talking about different domestic news. So again, a very good, I think, a very good learning, which is basically we have to track things in real time, not to draw wrong conclusions. If I'm just looking at the bigger picture here and you know, trying to have a longer term view on things, you see those topics evolving on a monthly basis quite dramatically without any specific pattern. Actually, people react immediately to the news. They share things which they feel are very important for them, for their community, and this is what you're going to see here. We've seen a lot of, we've seen the sheer volume of data, we've seen the speed or the velocity of conversations. let's make sure that we are consumer-centric and that we respect actually the authenticity of the discourse and of those conversations. In order to do that, we like at Ipsos to combine both a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach to text mining. The top-down is the red bubbles, and here what you see here is really the voice of consumers bubbling up. Red bubbles are things that we have predefined, themes that actually relate to some of the measurement that Simon talked about in some of our survey research, things that we can anticipate as researchers. The blue bubbles, on the other hand, are things that have been revealed by our deep learning algorithm, AI algorithm, in order to really make sure that we do not forget something that people want to share with us. And what I find fascinating myself is the fact that people are very much inclined to share very personal things in those conversations. The fact that they fear to feel depressed, the fact that they are concerned about the impact of this lockdown period on education for their kids, the fact that they cannot go and perform their sports activities. Also, a lot of concerns around racism and fake news that is happening on social media. So a lot of different themes that it was not that easy to anticipate. And that's really the beauty of AI in this respect. If you do that on a country basis, this is just an analysis we ran a few days ago based on US conversations. You can get a very granular view on what's going on social media. Obviously, you can look at very, let's say, meta themes, people commenting a lot the news, politics, and the way Trump is handling the crisis, but a lot of things happening also around medical discussions, around to what extent we can help the community, we can help each other. How can I share my own experiences during these very difficult times? This is exactly, and this is the power of user-generated content, is to get this authentic discourse at the end of the day. A fourth lesson, I think, is, and it's really important to also understand that social media analysis is not only about text mining, it's also understanding, people behaviors. And Sidar touched on that with the Turkish case. I think that when we looked at the COVID data corpus that we have, and we actually make sure that we look at all, we take a food category lens, if you like, and apply it to the data, we see that people are evolving in the way they talk about food, in the way they behave around this category. In times of uncertainty, they started to share, tips when in order to boost their people's immune system. As Sidar said, they went on stockpiling and they shared these experiences, panic buying experiences. And then when lockdown period happened, we saw a lot of people indeed sharing, as Sidar was saying, sharing things around the fact that they were eating snacks. They felt that it was something good for them because it gave them pleasure, but at the same time, a lot of them felt very guilty about that, that behavior. Over time, they tend to share things like, I'm missing my friends, I'm missing the nice dinner we had together. And very recently, we actually, because of the lack of options that people had, we saw the rise of what we call the home chef, when people actually are plunging into much more complex recipes. So applying a category lens to the data corpus gives you a much better understanding of how people change their behavior. The last lesson, I guess, is again something that we like to promote within Ipsos, is the fact that we do believe in the beauty and in the value of combining both survey research and social data. Survey research gives you what we call a better understanding of memories, what people remember, what stay in their mind, whereas social media, as I hope I've shown you, tell you more about the moments, about real-time experiences, and eventually about new brand routines. So just as a quick conclusion, I just want to share with you a few thoughts, because I talk about real-time, I talk about the velocity of conversations, and therefore a lot of people are actually claiming right now that we need more and more fresh data, which is absolutely true, both from a social media angle or from a survey research angle. But does that mean that historical data is not relevant anymore? No, we believe that historical data is still valid, and it's just that we need to adapt a little bit our predictive modeling methods in order to take care of what happened in the last 3 months. Consumer will continue to share and put things on social media, and therefore we also believe that real-time data analysis is key and will be even more critical in the coming weeks and months, because you need to take the right decisions at the right time. I didn't talk a lot about fake news today, but this is certainly some some things that you hear about the content that you can find on social media, indeed, and therefore some of those news are not data, true, but we believe at Ipsos that signals, even small ones, can have a huge impact in the future and in future trends. And that's also why we like to actually promote the integration of different types of sources of data in order to avoid being biased and to offer an holistic view on what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lendert. That was very interesting. I found particularly fascinating to see those bubbles that are basically, they create themselves thanks to our artificial intelligence way of looking at things, right? I think that's really good, because you don't need to have a pre-existing idea. You just let the data bubble up on itself. That's really great. So I just wanted to ask you a very last question. I think it is fair to say, from what you have just shown us, that social media gives us great insights, but social media alone is not enough for us to understand what's going on. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think it's just one part of the puzzle. We like to embrace the entire data ecosystem. You know, we cannot focus on one side of the story. We have to embrace it all, and that's the beauty of our method, I guess. It's really making sure that you have the right tools to gather the right data, but also having the data science to make sense of the combination of both.
Great. So integrating data streams is where we have to go. And fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Lendert. And now we're finished with the very latest news from China. And so thank you so much, Yang, for being with us until this late time for you. It's in the middle of the night for you. So thank you so much for staying up to share this update with us. Up to you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. This is Yan from the China team. So today, I'm glad to be here to share with you some updates how China is doing. 3 parts about the epidemic, and then about the impact, as well as something on resuming work, as well as some tips for the corporates. So as Simon mentioned, many countries is experiencing a decline on consumer confidence index, but China, it's pretty optimistic about it. So life is starting to return to normal here. 70% of the people believe that the domestic epidemic will end by June. So a few reasons behind that. We are still wearing masks these days, 3 months after the escalation of the epidemic. Fulfillment on life, it was not very good at February. So 52% of people felt their everyday needs were mostly fulfilled at that time. While when we asked them at late April, it comes to 81. So things are getting back to normal for us these days as the situation is getting more controlled. Taking Shanghai as an example, I locate in Shanghai. Last week, it was a big thing about the reopening of Shanghai Disney. I think some of the people might have seen it in the news. Tickets was completely sold out for the whole week. Then, of course, there are government regulations on the social distancing. So the capacity that they took was only a quarter of the normal capacity. And also, there was an opening of Popeye, an American fried chicken franchise in Shanghai just in the weekend. So you can see in the pictures, people queue up for like 3 hours just for eating chickens. So people are very used to going out these days, and people are going back into a normal rhythm of life. So shopping malls, restaurants, traffic of people is recovering. But in fact, having said all the happy things about people queuing up, there are worries. When we ask people whether they're concerned about the epidemic, there are still 71% of the people saying that they're concerned a big deal about it. There are many factors behind that. Highlight 2 of them here. The first one is about the reopening of Wuhan, which was the epicenter of the whole epidemic in China. So people were happy that to see the city is back in life. There were traffic jams, there were queues in front of stores. But at the same time, people are quite concerned about the asymptomatic carriers that might be going around the country. Another factor would be on imported cases, because number of confirmed cases in China is pretty low these days. So people do worry about the imported case. So when we ask people, what do you think the government should do on this? 49% of the people actually think government should encourage the overseas Chinese to stay at where they are and support them to focus on the disease prevention instead of bringing them back. So second part about the impact. The top worry these days in China, it's about the economy. And of course, the top two, I would say, are both life and death related. It's just that the first one on the economy is a financial aspect, no money, no life. And then the second one, being infected, it's more a biological aspect of it. So why people are so concerned about economy? One of the reasons behind that is a lot of people, it's already experiencing some impact on income already. So 83% of Chinese have been impacted by at least one of the following: on salary reduction or bonus delayed or even cancelled. So people can feel the pain on the financial side of this. And on the job side, when we ask about what you worry about your job, most people talks about they worry about the future development of the career. As China has been developing in a pretty high speed in the past 10 years, people has been growing as well. So now when economy is not so well, then people would be worried that the chances for development will be less. And of course, when income is impacted, it's normal that the share of wallet would have some changes too. So interestingly, when we ask people, how their spending would be changes, you can see on the top where on the increase of spending type of categories, these are all necessities. So health-related, diet, education, etc. So there are things that they will decrease spending in the future. So there are more kind of nice to have, for example, travels, for example, luxury, entertainment, etc. So for the category, for the brands in the bottom part of this, then watch out that it doesn't mean that you don't have business in China. It just means that you need to give a stronger reason to believe why people need to choose your brand, why people need to spend on your stuff. So that's something you need to watch out for. About resuming work. Now 84% of the people already 100% resumed work. It's back to normal life, mostly at office. So 76% of the people is already back to office. And this is why we are so used to going out. And that's why we are eating in restaurants, we are buying things in supermarkets, etc. When we ask people, what do they think? What is more important, epidemic prevention or work resumption? Actually, 59% people say it's equally important. So people do take economic recovery seriously. At the same time, people do watch out on the epidemic preventions. So as we go back to office, how do we protect ourselves? The top two is washing hands and wearing masks. So these are those to keep us away from the virus. And of course, there are some others that help us to boost our immunity. And there are things that we wish our company could do for us. So top two comes with providing masks and ventilation or air circulations in the office. And generally, in terms of the public, wishes on what corporate should do on the corporate social responsibilities, there are many actions that Chinese company has been trying to do to help to draw attentions in the public. And the most successful ones are donating medical supplies or donating products. And then at last, people do want to wish company to take some actions. The top one comes from taking care of the employees. So as a conclusion, or an advice to corporates, just protect your staff, protect your consumers, and they in return will protect your brand. So that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Jan, for sharing this view on China. So you started your presentation mentioning that 70%, if I'm not mistaken, of Chinese think that in June this pandemic will be ended. So June is a nice month to look forward to in China, apparently. So I'm wondering, what is your personal expectation for June, Jan?
I just love to go out of the country. I've been locked here for like, 6 months already. I want to go to a beach somewhere in Thailand with a bear.
Okay, so you're not one of the ones who will be queuing for the Shanghai Disney. No.
No. I want to go out. I'm here for too long. I think a lot of Chinese want to go out too.
Yeah. Okay, so back to travel. Yeah, I guess the tourism industry will be very happy to hear you say that. Yeah, we're for our respective tourism industries to pick up again. Great. So thank you very much to all our speakers who've shared all their experiences and data and interesting insights from around the world. And I would like to also thank all of you who were with us today, and to give you an appointment for in 2 weeks' time for our next Signals webinar. Thank you very much and have a lovely rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and have a nice day.